Welcome to Untold Stories of Freddie Mercury. If this is your first time here, make sure to subscribe and let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. And now, let's dive into today's unforgettable story. The autumn rain drummed against the windows of Garden Lodge as Freddie Mercury sat in his favorite armchair, surrounded by towers of fan mail that seemed to grow taller each day. It was October 1989, and despite Queen's phenomenal success, Freddie had maintained a personal tradition that few knew about. He insisted on reading every single letter that arrived at his doorstep. While most celebrities delegated such tasks to assistants, Freddie believed that each letter represented a human soul reaching out, deserving of his personal attention. That particular evening, something felt different. The weight of recent months pressed heavily on his shoulders. His health had been declining, though he kept this knowledge locked away from the world, sharing it only with his closest confidants. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, reading letters from people seeking hope and inspiration, while privately battling his own demons and fears about an uncertain future. As his fingers moved through the pile, one envelope caught his attention. Unlike the others, this one was written in shaky handwriting, the kind that spoke of struggle and determination. The return address showed a small town in northern England, a place Freddie had never heard of. Something about the careful way his name was written on the envelope made him pause. There was love in those letters, but also something else, a fragility that seemed to echo through the paper itself. The house around him was unusually quiet. Mary Austin had gone home for the evening, and his cats wandered silently through the rooms like gentle guardians. The only sounds were the persistent rain and the soft ticking of the antique clock in the corner. Freddie had always found solace in these quiet moments, when the chaos of fame subsided and he could simply be himself, not the flamboyant performer the world knew, but simply Farrokh, the boy from Zanzibar, who had somehow become a legend. He opened the envelope with the same care he gave to all his correspondence, but as his eyes began to scan the words, his entire world shifted. The letter was from a 16-year-old girl named Sarah, and her words carried a weight that immediately transported him beyond the comfortable walls of his mansion. She wrote about her battle with leukemia, about the long nights in hospital rooms where Queen's music had become her companion, her source of strength when everything else seemed to be falling apart. What struck Freddie most profoundly wasn't just the girl's courage in the face of such overwhelming odds, but the way she wrote about his music. She didn't ask for anything. No autographs, no meetings, no special favors. Instead, she simply wanted to thank him for giving her something to hold on to when the darkness threatened to consume her completely. She described how Bohemian Rhapsody had played during her first chemotherapy session, how We Are the Champions had become her personal anthem during the hardest days, and how Somebody to Love had helped her feel less alone in those sterile hospital corridors. As Freddie read each carefully crafted sentence, tears began to form in his eyes. Here was a young person facing mortality with more grace and dignity than most adults could muster, and she was thanking him for simply doing what he loved. The letter revealed a perspective that shattered his understanding of what his music truly meant to people. It wasn't just entertainment, it was a lifeline, a beacon of hope in the darkest moments of human experience. The rain continued its gentle percussion against the windows, as Freddie sat in stunned silence, the letter trembling slightly in his hands. In that moment, he realized that everything was about to change. This wasn't just fan mail, this was a calling, a responsibility he had never fully comprehended until now. Freddie set the letter down on the mahogany side table, but his eyes remained fixed on the delicate handwriting that had just turned his evening upside down. The words seemed to glow in the lamplight, each sentence carrying an emotional weight that pressed against his chest like a physical force. He had received thousands of letters over the years, many from fans facing difficult circumstances, but something about Sarah's message penetrated deeper than anything he had ever encountered. Rising from his chair, Freddie began to pace the length of his living room, a habit that emerged whenever his mind raced with overwhelming thoughts. The Persian rugs beneath his feet had witnessed countless such moments, creative breakthroughs, personal revelations, and now this profound encounter with a stranger's courage. His cats, sensing the shift in their owner's energy, watched from their various perches with the intuitive awareness that animals possess when humans are processing something significant. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on him. Here he was, a man who had spent his career crafting songs about triumph, love, and the human experience. Yet he felt utterly unprepared for the raw honesty of a 16-year-old girl's gratitude. Sarah's words had stripped away all the layers of fame, fortune, and artistic achievement, reducing everything to its most essential truth, the power of music to heal, to comfort, and to provide hope when hope seemed impossible. Freddie returned to the letter, reading it again with even greater attention to detail. Sarah had mentioned specific songs, describing how each one had accompanied her through different stages of her treatment. She wrote about listening to "Don't Stop Me Now" during her morning medication routine, using its infectious energy to fuel her determination to face another day. She described how "Love of My Life" reminded her of her relationship with her parents, who had never left her side throughout the ordeal. What moved Freddie most profoundly was the maturity in her writing. Despite her young age and devastating circumstances, Sarah possessed a wisdom that seemed far beyond her years. She wrote about accepting her situation without self-pity, about finding joy in small moments, and about the way music had become a bridge between her former life and her current reality. Her words painted a picture of someone who had been forced to confront mortality at an age when most teenagers worried about exams and relationships. The letter also revealed details about Sarah's life that made her feel incredibly real to Freddie. She mentioned her love for art, her dreams of becoming a teacher, and her close relationship with her younger brother, who visited her every day after school. She wrote about the nurses who had become like family, about the other patients who had become her closest friends, and about the small victories that marked her progress through treatment. As the evening deepened, Freddie found himself thinking about his own relationship with mortality. His recent diagnosis had forced him to confront questions about legacy, about what truly mattered, and about how he wanted to spend whatever time remained. Sarah's letter seemed to provide answers he hadn't even known he was seeking. Her gratitude for his music revealed a purpose that transcended commercial success or critical acclaim. It was about human connection, about touching lives in ways that could provide comfort during the darkest hours. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a crystalline silence that seemed to amplify the importance of the moment. Freddie realized that this letter had arrived at precisely the right time, when he most needed to understand the true impact of his artistic legacy. Sarah's courage in the face of uncertainty mirrored his own situation, creating an unexpected bond between a global superstar and a teenage girl he had never met. Standing by the window, looking out at the glistening London streets, Freddie made a decision that would surprise everyone who knew him. This letter wouldn't simply be filed away with the others. Sarah's courage demanded a response that matched the extraordinary nature of her gift to him. The question wasn't whether he would respond, but how he could possibly honor the trust and gratitude she had placed in his hands. The following morning arrived with an unusual clarity that seemed to mirror Freddie's newfound sense of purpose. He had barely slept, his mind churning with possibilities and emotions that Sarah's letter had unleashed. As dawn broke over London, painting the sky in soft pastels that reminded him of the watercolors he had loved as a child, Freddie knew that a simple written response would never be enough. This situation called for something extraordinary, something that would honor the courage and grace that radiated from every word of Sarah's message. Freddie spent the early hours researching everything he could about Sarah's condition and her hospital. He discovered that she was being treated at a regional medical center that specialized in pediatric oncology, a place where young people fought battles that most adults could never imagine facing. The more he learned about her situation, the more determined he became to create a response that would match the profound impact her letter had made on him. The idea that began forming in his mind was audacious, even by Freddie's standards. He had always been known for grand gestures and theatrical presentations, but this would be different. This wouldn't be about spectacle or showmanship. It would be about genuine human connection, about using his platform and resources to bring light into a young person's darkest hour. The plan that emerged was so personal, so far removed from his public persona, that even his closest friends would be shocked by its intimacy and sincerity. Freddie began making phone calls, reaching out to contacts who could help him understand the logistics of what he was contemplating. He spoke with medical professionals, learning about the protocols and restrictions that governed hospital visits, especially for patients with compromised immune systems. He researched the legal and practical considerations involved in arranging what he had in mind, discovering that the path forward would be more complex than he had initially imagined. The challenge only strengthened his resolve. Sarah had faced obstacles that made his logistical hurdles seem trivial by comparison. If she could maintain her spirit and gratitude while battling a life-threatening illness, he could certainly navigate the bureaucratic maze that stood between him and his goal. The determination that had driven him to transform from Farrokh Bulsara into Freddie Mercury now focused entirely on creating something meaningful for a young fan who had given him an unexpected gift of perspective. As the day progressed, Freddie found himself thinking about the nature of fame and its responsibilities. Throughout his career, he had maintained a careful distance between his public and private selves, protecting his personal space while giving everything to his performances. Sarah's letter had blurred those boundaries, revealing how his music had become part of someone else's most intimate struggles. This realization carried a weight that was both humbling and inspiring. The plan he was developing would require him to step completely outside his comfort zone. It would mean abandoning the protective barriers he had built around his private life and making himself vulnerable in ways that terrified him. Yet the courage Sarah had demonstrated in her letter made his own fears seem insignificant. If a 16-year-old girl could face her mortality with such grace, he could certainly find the strength to respond with equal authenticity. By evening, the basic framework of his plan had taken shape. It was ambitious, logistically challenging, and emotionally demanding, but it felt right in a way that few things in his life ever had. This wouldn't be about charity or publicity. It would be about one human being reaching out to another in a moment of genuine need. The fact that one of them happened to be a global superstar was almost irrelevant compared to the fundamental human connection that Sarah's letter had created. As Freddie prepared for bed that night, he felt a sense of anticipation that reminded him of the excitement before a major performance. Tomorrow, he would begin putting his plan into action, starting a chain of events that would surprise everyone who thought they knew him. Sarah's courage had challenged him to be better than he had ever been before, and he was determined not to disappoint her. The next 3 days became a whirlwind of phone calls, meetings, and careful negotiations as Freddie worked tirelessly to transform his vision into reality. His usual routine of studio sessions and business meetings took a backseat to something far more important: the intricate planning required to make his unprecedented gesture possible. Each conversation brought new challenges, but also reinforced his determination to see this through, no matter what obstacles emerged. Freddie's first major hurdle came from his own management team. When he explained what he wanted to do, the initial reaction was one of concern and confusion. His representatives had spent years carefully managing his public image and protecting his privacy, and this plan seemed to contradict everything they had worked to establish. They worried about security risks, legal implications, and the potential for unwanted publicity that could spiral beyond their control. But Freddie had made up his mind, and those who knew him well recognized the unmistakable signs of his absolute determination. This wasn't a whim or a publicity stunt. It was something that had touched the deepest part of his soul. He explained to his team that this wasn't about Queen or his career. It was about responding to an act of courage that had fundamentally changed his perspective on what his music meant to people. The hospital administration presented another layer of complexity. When Freddie's representatives first contacted them, the staff assumed it was some kind of elaborate hoax. The idea that one of the world's biggest rock stars would want to make a personal visit to a teenage patient seemed too extraordinary to be real. It took several days of verification, legal documentation, and careful explanation before they began to take the request seriously. Medical protocols added yet another dimension to the challenge. Sarah's compromised immune system meant that any visit would need to follow strict guidelines to protect her health. Freddie would need medical clearance, and the timing would have to coordinate with her treatment schedule. The hospital's chief of staff explained that even family visits were sometimes restricted during certain phases of treatment, making the logistics even more complicated. Despite these obstacles, Freddie pressed forward with a persistence that surprised even himself. He submitted to medical examinations, provided detailed health records, and agreed to follow whatever protocols the medical team deemed necessary. His willingness to accommodate every requirement demonstrated a level of commitment that gradually won over the skeptical hospital staff. The most delicate aspect of the entire plan involved maintaining absolute secrecy. Freddie insisted that Sarah should have no advance warning of what was being arranged. He wanted her to experience the surprise naturally, without the anxiety or overwhelming anticipation that advance knowledge might create. This meant that even her parents and medical team would need to be carefully briefed about maintaining confidentiality until the moment arrived. As the arrangement slowly fell into place, Freddie found himself experiencing emotions he hadn't felt in years. The process of organizing this visit had stripped away all the usual trappings of his celebrity status, reducing everything to its most human elements. He wasn't Freddie Mercury, the rock star, planning a publicity event. He was simply someone who had been moved by another person's courage and wanted to respond in kind. The planning also forced him to confront his own vulnerabilities in unexpected ways. Arranging to visit someone facing a life-threatening illness while dealing with his own health challenges created a complex emotional landscape that he had to navigate carefully. Yet rather than deterring him, these parallels only strengthened his resolve to make this happen. By the end of the week, all the pieces were finally in place. The hospital had agreed to the visit, medical clearances had been obtained, and security arrangements had been discreetly coordinated. Sarah remained completely unaware that her simple letter of gratitude had set in motion a chain of events that would soon transform an ordinary day in her hospital room into something extraordinary. The stage was set for a meeting that would surprise everyone involved, including Freddie himself. The morning of the visit arrived with an overcast sky that seemed to mirror the nervous energy coursing through Freddie's veins. He had awakened before dawn, unable to sleep, as the magnitude of what he was about to do settled over him like a heavy blanket. This wasn't a concert where he could hide behind the persona of a rock god. This was raw, unfiltered human interaction at its most vulnerable level. Freddie chose his outfit with unusual care, abandoning his typical flamboyant stage wear for something more appropriate to a hospital setting. He selected a simple black sweater, dark jeans, and comfortable shoes, wanting to appear approachable rather than intimidating. Even his jewelry was minimal, just his wedding ring from Mary and a simple chain around his neck. The transformation was so complete that he barely recognized himself in the mirror. The drive north took nearly 3 hours, giving Freddie ample time to contemplate what lay ahead. His driver, sworn to secrecy like everyone else involved in the plan, navigated the motorway while Freddie sat in the back seat, alternating between reading Sarah's letter for the 100th time and staring out at the English countryside rolling past. The familiar landscape seemed different somehow, as if he was seeing it through new eyes, the eyes of someone about to embark on one of the most meaningful journeys of his life. As they approached the hospital, Freddie felt his heart rate increase. The building was smaller than he had expected, a modest regional facility that served the surrounding communities with quiet efficiency. There were no crowds, no paparazzi, no fanfare, just a normal Tuesday afternoon at a place where extraordinary battles were fought every day by ordinary people displaying extraordinary courage. The hospital's chief administrator met them at a side entrance, away from the main lobby where Freddie's presence might cause unwanted attention. The woman's professionalism was evident, but Freddie could see the amazement in her eyes as she guided him through the corridors. She explained that Sarah was having a good day, alert and comfortable, though she had no idea what was about to happen. Walking through the pediatric oncology ward was an experience that shook Freddie to his core. The hallways were decorated with colorful artwork and motivational posters, but beneath the cheerful facade lay an undeniable gravity. These were children and teenagers fighting for their lives, and their families who had reorganized their entire existence around hope and medical schedules. The courage required just to exist in this environment was staggering. Freddie passed rooms where young patients were receiving treatment, some sleeping peacefully, while others engaged in quiet activities with visiting family members. The normalcy of these scenes, homework being completed, games being played, conversations being shared, struck him as profoundly heroic. These families had found ways to maintain love, joy, and connection in the face of unimaginable challenges. The administrator paused outside Sarah's room, explaining that she was currently alone as her parents had stepped out for lunch. This timing was perfect, as it would allow for a more intimate initial meeting without the additional complexity of family dynamics. Through the small window in the door, Freddie caught his first glimpse of the young woman whose letter had changed everything. Sarah was sitting up in bed, sketching in a notebook with intense concentration. Her head was covered with a colorful scarf, and despite the medical equipment surrounding her, she radiated a vitality that was immediately apparent. She looked exactly as Freddie had imagined, young, brave, and completely absorbed in creating something beautiful, despite her circumstances. Taking a deep breath, Freddie prepared to enter a room that would forever change both their lives. The moment had arrived to transform a letter into a living connection, to bridge the gap between a global superstar and a teenage fan through the simple act of human compassion. Freddie knocked gently on the doorframe, his heart pounding with an intensity that rivaled any pre-concert nerves he had ever experienced. Sarah looked up from her sketchbook, and for a moment, time seemed suspended in that small hospital room. Her eyes widened with disbelief, then confusion, then a dawning recognition that transformed her entire expression from casual curiosity to absolute wonder. The sketchbook slipped from her hands as she struggled to process what she was seeing. Freddie Mercury, the man whose voice had carried her through countless difficult nights, was standing in her doorway with a gentle smile and nervous energy that made him seem surprisingly human. The larger-than-life performer she had only seen on television and in magazines had somehow materialized in her small world, bringing with him an aura of warmth and genuine concern. Freddie stepped into the room slowly, allowing Sarah time to adjust to his presence. He could see the shock in her eyes gradually giving way to joy, though she remained speechless, as if afraid that speaking might break whatever spell had brought him there. The room itself was a testament to her spirit. Walls covered with get-well cards, artwork she had created during her treatment, and photographs of family and friends who had supported her journey. What struck Freddie most powerfully was how normal Sarah appeared despite her circumstances. Yes, the medical equipment and hospital setting were constant reminders of her battle, but her eyes sparkled with intelligence and humor, and her smile, when it finally emerged, was radiant enough to light up the entire room. This was the brave young woman whose words had moved him so deeply, and meeting her in person only amplified his admiration for her courage. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the letter she kept on her bedside table, the very letter she had sent to Freddie weeks earlier. She held it up with a questioning look, as if seeking confirmation that this impossible moment was really happening. Freddie nodded, pulling his own copy of her letter from his jacket pocket, showing her that her words had not only reached him, but had traveled with him on this journey. The emotion in the room was palpable as both of them processed the significance of this meeting. For Sarah, it represented validation that her gratitude had somehow found its way to the person who had given her so much strength. For Freddie, it was the completion of a circle that had begun with her courageous words and culminated in this face-to-face encounter with genuine human resilience. Freddie moved closer to her bed, noting the small details that made Sarah's space uniquely hers. There were art supplies scattered across the rolling table, evidence of the creative spirit that illness had not been able to diminish. A small radio sat nearby, and Freddie wondered how many times Queen's songs had filled this room, providing comfort during the long hours of treatment and recovery. The silence between them was comfortable rather than awkward, filled with mutual recognition and respect. Sarah seemed to be studying Freddie's face, perhaps comparing the real person to the images she had seen countless times in magazines and on television. What she found there was someone far more gentle and vulnerable than his stage persona suggested, a man whose eyes reflected genuine care and concern for her well-being. As the initial shock began to subside, Sarah's natural personality started to emerge. Her smile became more confident, and she gestured toward the chair beside her bed, inviting him to sit down. This simple gesture marked the beginning of a conversation that would prove to be one of the most meaningful exchanges of both their lives. As Freddie settled into the chair beside Sarah's bed, the formal barriers between rock star and fan began to dissolve, replaced by something far more profound, a genuine human connection built on mutual respect and understanding. Sarah's initial shock had transformed into a comfortable warmth, and she began sharing stories about her treatment with the same matter-of-fact courage that had characterized her letter. She showed Freddie her sketchbook, revealing page after page of artwork that documented her journey through illness. There were drawings of nurses who had become like family, portraits of fellow patients who had inspired her, and abstract pieces that seemed to capture the emotional landscape of her experience. Each sketch told a story of resilience, and Freddie found himself amazed by the artistic talent that had flourished even in these challenging circumstances. One particular drawing caught his attention, a detailed portrait of herself listening to music, headphones covering her bald head, with musical notes floating around her like protective spirits. Sarah explained that she had created this piece during one of her most difficult treatment periods, when Queen's music had been her primary source of comfort. The image perfectly captured the transformative power of music that Freddie had always believed in, but had never seen illustrated so powerfully. Sarah then shared stories about the other patients on the ward, describing their individual battles with the same respect and admiration that others might reserve for war heroes. She spoke about Tommy, an 8-year-old who sang Queen songs during his treatments, and Maria, a teenager who had taught herself to play guitar while recovering from surgery. These young people had formed an unlikely community, supporting each other through the darkest moments with humor, creativity, and unwavering determination. What moved Freddie most deeply was Sarah's complete absence of self-pity. She acknowledged the difficulty of her situation without dwelling on it, instead focusing on the positive aspects of her experience, the friendships she had formed, the strength she had discovered within herself, and the way her perspective on life had been forever changed. Her maturity and wisdom seemed far beyond her 16 years, forged in the crucible of facing mortality at such a young age. As their conversation continued, Freddie began to understand why Sarah's letter had affected him so profoundly. She possessed a rare combination of vulnerability and strength that reminded him of his own struggles with authenticity and purpose. Her gratitude for his music wasn't just appreciation for entertainment, it was recognition of art's power to heal, to inspire, and to provide hope when hope seemed impossible. Sarah also shared her dreams and aspirations, speaking about her desire to become an art teacher once her treatment was complete. She wanted to work with children who faced challenges similar to her own, using creativity as a tool for healing and self-expression. Her plans were detailed and realistic, demonstrating a faith in her future that was both inspiring and heartbreaking in its determination. The afternoon light streaming through the hospital window began to fade as their conversation deepened. Freddie found himself sharing aspects of his own life that he rarely discussed with anyone, his fears about legacy, his struggles with the pressures of fame, and his growing understanding of what truly mattered in life. Sarah listened with the same intensity she brought to everything else, offering insights that surprised him with their depth and wisdom. As visiting hours drew to a close, both of them realized that this meeting had become something neither had expected. What had begun as a gesture of kindness had evolved into a profound exchange that had enriched both their lives in ways that would last long after this day ended. As the evening shadows lengthened across Sarah's hospital room, Freddie realized that their time together was drawing to a close. What had begun as his attempt to give something meaningful to a brave young fan had transformed into one of the most profound experiences of his own life. Sarah had given him far more than he could ever give her, a renewed understanding of his music's true purpose and a glimpse of courage that would stay with him forever. Before leaving, Freddie made a promise that would remain between them. He arranged for Sarah to receive a private phone line that would allow her to reach him directly, whenever she needed encouragement or simply wanted to talk. This wasn't about publicity or grand gestures, it was about maintaining the genuine connection they had discovered in that small hospital room. The phone calls that followed over the coming months would become treasured moments for both of them. Sarah's parents returned just as Freddie was preparing to leave, and their reaction was everything he had hoped for. The joy and gratitude in their eyes reflected the same spirit their daughter had shown throughout her battle. They had watched their child face unimaginable challenges with grace and determination, and seeing her happiness in this moment provided them with a gift they would cherish forever. The impact of this visit extended far beyond Sarah's room. Word of Freddie's presence spread quietly through the hospital, and while he maintained his privacy, the staff spoke in hushed, amazed tones about the rock star who had spent an entire afternoon simply talking with a young patient. His genuine care and humble demeanor had impressed everyone who witnessed it, challenging their preconceptions about celebrity and fame. In the weeks that followed, Sarah's condition began to improve dramatically. Her doctors attributed the progress to her treatment protocol, but those closest to her noticed a renewed vitality that seemed to coincide with Freddie's visit. She threw herself into her art with even greater passion, creating pieces that captured the joy and hope she felt about her future. Her sketchbook filled with new drawings that reflected her growing confidence and optimism. Freddie, meanwhile, found that his encounter with Sarah had fundamentally changed his approach to his music and his life. The songs he wrote in the months following their meeting carried a deeper emotional resonance, informed by his understanding of music's power to heal and inspire. He began to see his artistic legacy not just in terms of commercial success or critical acclaim, but in terms of the individual lives his music had touched. The story of Freddie's visit to Sarah never became public knowledge during his lifetime. Both of them understood that the power of their connection lay in its privacy and authenticity. It wasn't about creating a media moment or generating publicity. It was about two human beings reaching across the divide of circumstance to find common ground in courage, creativity, and hope. Sarah eventually completed her treatment successfully, going on to fulfill her dream of becoming an art teacher. She never forgot the afternoon when her musical hero had walked into her hospital room, but more importantly, she carried forward the lesson their meeting had taught her, that genuine human connection could transcend any barrier, and that courage, when shared, had the power to transform lives. Years later, when Freddie's own battle with illness became public knowledge, Sarah understood that their meeting had been even more meaningful than she had realized. Two people facing mortality had found strength in each other, creating a bond that would endure long after their time together had ended. If you enjoyed today's story, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming emotional and inspiring tales about Freddie's life and legacy. Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one, and often your ideas inspire our next episode. See you next time.